everybody, and welcome to the Justle podcast. I'm Ernie a career coach and leadership coach, and also your host for this panel that we're having this morning on toxic workplaces. I have a whole bunch of great people here with me today that I'll introduce right now. Dan Diomeda is a technologist and product leader in the scientific software industry. He's also the founder of Justle and lives in Massachusetts, and a lifelong friend of mine. Welcome, Dan. Ali Glaser is an executive performance coach and leadership development specialist focused on one-on-one coaching and team training. She is based in central New Jersey, wherever that is, Ali. We'll have to talk about that. Welcome, Ali. Elise Greenberg is a leadership and career transition coach focused on strengths-based coaching, and Elise is coming to us from just outside Boston. Welcome. And Natalie, could you pronounce your last name for me, Natalie?
Skvortsova.
Yes.
It's a hard one.
Okay. Is a program lead in big tech and a professional coach living in London, which is why we're here so early this morning. Her work is about creating change in your life and unlocking your true potential. Welcome, Natalie. So excited to have you all here today to talk about this very important topic that we're seeing out in the world today, across the world. We're talking about toxic workplaces. So defined, let's just make sure we're leveled on what that actually means for all of us. And I'm going to pick on Elise first. What does a toxic workplace mean for you?
For me, it means anything that anything that really stops someone from doing their work in the most straightforward, authentic way. And it has tons of manifestations. So I think it's just something that doesn't feel right. Probably isn't.
Yeah. And I did some quick Googling about this before our meeting. And according to the Cleveland Clinic, what at a high level, it's an environment that doesn't align with your value system. And your value system is your core beliefs, your core value, things that are crucial to you as a person. And if where you are is in opposition to that, that's going to manifest in many negative ways, right? What else? How else does that show up? Anyone else have something to weigh in on with there?
I was thinking about it yesterday, and to catch it, I think we need to look at three key areas or how it can manifest at work environment. Mm-hmm. One, it can be any type of the aggressive communication. It can be the yelling, the tone of the voice, even the body language might be aggressive. The second type is probably everything related to humiliation. Whenever you criticize a person in a disrespectful way, especially in front of others, and it doesn't matter if it's during the business call, a meeting, or if just some other people are copied in the email thread. And the last one, which is probably the most difficult to recognize, is different types of manipulation, including passive-aggressive behavior. And this can manifest in different ways. For example, one manager can remove responsibilities from a certain person, the key responsibilities, or give too much work in the last moment. And sometimes it's very difficult to understand what is that? Is it intentional, or is that because there is a real business need? And that's why probably the last bucket is the most complex to catch and for a person to realize if one needs to action or not.
So that last one, is that kind of like, would you say that's like a crisis-driven environment where like kind of everything's a last-minute fire drill, or?
No, I think it's quite normal for different organizations to be in the crisis situation. It's a question if someone uses this to put you in a worse position than you should be, or if one, let's say, disrespects you, but in a more hidden way.
Okay. A more subversive way. Yeah. They talk about microaggressions being prevalent in organizations that have this challenge, right? It's not something that you can kind of like report out on because it's not as blatant and egregious, but it's still out there, right?
Right.
Ali, you have your very thoughtful face on here. What's going on there?
I think for me, I mean, all of that everything Elise and Natalie just said, I also think just not to oversimplify, but a disempowering environment, an uninclusive, is that a word? I use inclusive, usually more than uninclusive, but an environment that doesn't allow people to, I think Elise said, be their authentic selves, do their best work, feel good about showing up every day. And it manifests in a lot of the ways that Natalie described, for sure.
Probably, Ali, what I will also add, you had a great note that it's uninclusive. I would also add that it should be a repetitive situation. So if something happens once, probably I wouldn't call it a toxic environment or workplace.
Pervasive.
Repetitive.
So pervasive issues. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then definitely that's a big signal.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of issues, day-to-day issues, I would agree. I think there are certain events or, like Ernie said, microaggressions that aren't so micro, that just one time, hearing someone say something one time, being made to feel a certain way, even just one time, can result in a toxic environment. And it might not pervade through the organization, but for that employee, it's a toxic environment.
Yep.
Well, I think that brings up a point of, what makes it, and it could be systemic, it could be from the leadership down and cultural, it could be a single manager, it could be a peer. And so that's what makes it especially insidious for any individual, is because it oftentimes isn't systemic and everywhere. It's just one person. And they would have a much harder time coming forward and even identifying it if it's not cultural.
Yep. And Dan, I know you don't have coaching clients like the rest of this panel, but you've been out there, you've been out talking to people as part of building Justle. You've worked with quite a few job seekers or folks who are in transition. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's the big definitions is the really apparent ones. We've talked about the really aggressive and just overpowering management or leadership. And then there's the worst ones, which is actually the subtle ones, because you don't recognize that you're in a toxic work environment. There's just these little signs here and there, like, hey, I didn't really want to do that, but somehow they managed to make me do it, right? That manipulation, if you will. Or, what you think your leader is telling you to do, you think it's the right thing until, you might not have the experience until years later to recognize, like, wow, that was not what I should have been doing there. I should have been, fighting for the quote unquote little people, if you will, or doing the right thing. And it's not always against your ethics or your morals. It's just, you didn't recognize that this wasn't the proper direction to go, and it stunted your professional growth in some way.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, how else does that show up for, and I'm talking to the coaches here, you all have clients who have likely experienced this. How does this show up for them personally, whether it's at work or outside of work?
I've seen it in with my clients in a bunch of different ways, and it really oftentimes it's a lot of trust in their managers and trust that their managers are acting in the same way that they would. And oftentimes the managers are not, because they're, whether they're playing a chess game or just managing a bunch of different people. I've been on the other side of hearing about conversations that my clients have had with their managers, and it's just not sounding right. It's just sounding like something's missing. And my clients are very earnest, and my clients are straightforward and bring their values, and can't even sometimes understand that there may be some game playing in the back or backstabbing or whatever it may be. And so it's almost that there's this lack. There's no meeting of the minds between a manager and an employee. And when that happens, there's no chance for like my client to even understand the work environment. And then it's like trying to move across quicksand. It just feels very unsettling. And they need interpretation. I mean, I think, a lot of times other people, whether it's friends, family, coaches, therapists, whatever, oftentimes it requires interpretation because people are only familiar with their own experiences.
Any other, that's great. And I think having that perspective with your client of, they're in it, right? And sometimes it's hard it's kind of like the frog in the boiling pan, right? It's hard to tell when you're in the middle of it and that's how everyone else is acting. Not everyone has the benefit of having wonderful coaches like all of you to help them see their situation more objectively or their environment more objectively. So how do you, it's almost like needing, and I see this out in the news and the media of almost like a checklist for make sure you're not in one or make sure you're not walking into one. And how can we arm people with those skills? Because something might look great on paper, but then you start talking to people and you're like, oh, spidey sense goes up, right?
Yeah.
Well, I also think it's very much like a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
So just as we're in relationships with partners, parents, whomever is in our lives, we tend to have a sense of when it's unhealthy and when it's healthy. And it's not unlike a work environment. What's the relationship you have to your boss, to your peers, different departments in the organization. And I think it's important to note, you can have a wonderful company, does great work, and you've got a leadership team or a manager in this department that, people are just excited and motivated and seen and respected. And then another department where it's completely toxic and that pervades, but it's also a little bit more subtle sometimes in terms of the bigger picture of the organization.
Yeah. What about you, Natalie? I know, Natalie, you coach within the workforce. And so I know part of what you wanted to bring to this conversation was how to make it the anti-toxic workplace, right? So are there some I'd say pillars or tenets that come to mind for you as you're thinking through the ideal organization?
So maybe let me come back to your previous question,
great.
how to recognize that something is not normal, because when you're in this situation, it might be very, very difficult to understand what actually is happening. So if you feel constantly stressed or under attack, disbalanced, dismotivated, that's something that you need to start looking deeper into. What are the drivers of this dissatisfaction, low motivation, unhappiness, feeling constantly stressed, not desiring maybe to talk to your colleagues or someone on the team or your manager? Start thinking, maybe that might be the issue with the relationship or the toxic environment that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Not necessary, but that's the easiest way when something is disbalanced, when you're unhappy at work. Start digging and trying to understand what is the key driver of these feelings. Now, what is kind of the direction that we'd like to take the teams towards? As we want to have efficient, happy teams, right? For that, you need first respectful relationship between all the members and certain psychological safety. When people can communicate respectfully, even if they disagree, when they feel safe to be vulnerable if needed, when they feel safe to take actions, maybe risks, to make mistakes, and still feel that they won't be put up front of everyone and constantly judged. So this psychological safety and certain level of trust is critical. It's critical for efficient teams, but also to fight back this unhealthy work environment. And this is something that can be only driven from both ways, top down and also from within the team. It cannot be done only one way, unfortunately. There should be the culture around the company that the respect is important, that the respectful communication is important, and other behaviors will not be tolerated. And at the same time, each team member needs to commit to that. And if they spot something, that something is going wrong, they will address it, they will call it out, and they will start talking about that as well. So the key to everyone is respect, in my opinion.
Great. And behaviors, that's a great call out, Natalie, around it has to be both ways, and it starts with leadership, and you can swim upstream all you want as an employee trying to change the culture of the organization, but we know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So getting leaders to recognize how their behavior may be impacting the productivity, well-being, overall health of their team is important. So that's great.
And Ernie, I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just to add to that, the leader might be fully aware of what they're doing, and that's just their behavior.
And not care.
Honestly, that is a problem. I've been on both ends, the subtle and very aggressive receiving end of the toxic work environment. The aggressive one's really easy to understand, and you just need to get yourself out of that. If you're not comfortable with it, you need to move on, right? But that was the leader's leadership style. That was just the way it was, and that's, if you didn't want to work there, don't work there. So they often don't want to change, but the subtle ones, I had management that pitted employees against employees and dangled carrots in front of them. That's really hard to recognize. You think, it's like the movies. Oh yeah, I'm going to get a big promotion because I'm moving forward and, I'm doing what my leader is asking me to do. But in the end, you just realize it's counterproductive. So that's where you might be able to do a little bit more change to the leader, say, hey, this isn't really working out. But you need to communicate with all your colleagues, just to talk to them, say, hey, is this right? Did I hear this correctly? And not just go with the hearsay and kind of move on with your life that way.
Yeah. All right. So Elise, you were going to jump in, Elise.
Yeah, I was going to jump in a little bit on what some of the definitions, or when we see what those behaviors are. And I think we're seeing that it's when leaders decide for recognition, like what are leaders recognizing employees for doing? What are they promoting people for doing? Who are they promoting? We're all seeing these things, and it's the people. If they're promoting people who are working 24/7 and have no work-life balance, that is a strong indicator of what that environment is like and what we need to be in order to be successful. So it's all those little clues that we're looking at around us, is who's going to certain meetings, being invited to meetings, and who's not being invited to meetings. When we're in meetings, it's who's being called on and whose comments are being, even something small like being added to, versus you give a comment and then it shifts to another topic, right? There's lots of ways of feeling slighted. There's lots of ways of even just reading the room to understand what are the values of this organization. What am I being valued for? Fundamentally, when we bring our own self-confidence and our own skill set, we are better at identifying those things and not taking it personally. And so when we, it's kind of to Natalie's point and everyone's where it's this top down, but also internally, it's who are we bringing ourselves to the table? And then therefore, are we able to objectively identify when things aren't making sense? Or are we constantly wondering, like, was it something I said? Am I not doing it right? It's harder when we're younger. It's easier when we're older. Like Dan had said, it so resonates when, to look back on a previous job that I had and see, like, maybe a lot of that wasn't my fault. I was just trying. I was a pleaser at the time. I was, XYZ, but maybe there were some forces working against me. And, and it wasn't my own my own issues. And so I think there's lots of ways in which in an environment we could find. And then I think one of the other things that comes up is when we're interviewing for jobs, it's also, how do we know when we see those red flags, or what are those red flags? And not very different because they're similar themes, but we should certainly be looking for them.
Yeah, and so I thinking about the people who may be watching today. Most folks are coming to our site, looking for opportunities to accelerate their job search, get tools, get insights. So let's use that persona. You've got an interview or you have a job offer. To piggyback on what Elise just said, what are some of those red flags that we haven't already talked about that may pop up in an interview or onboarding? Anything come to mind for folks?
How people treat each other, first and foremost. So, I mean, you can observe that in a Zoom, and you can observe that in person, depending on the situation, and who's allowed to speak, who takes up the most room. Is it by seniority? Does it matter what the job title is in terms of who gets the opportunity to speak at an interview, at a meeting, in any kind of a session? I have a client who was telling me this story about their very first job interview. They were, very young in their career. And as they're being shown, it was a great interview. It went great. They were basically offered the job on the spot. And in the same time that they were being offered the job and shown where their office would be, the second in command, who was conducting the interview, took a moment out to say, of the conversation about, like, here's going to be your office, and to say, excuse me 1 minute, and proceeded to scream at the top of their lungs at another employee. And I don't know if at 20 something years old, that individual realized that might be a big red flag.
Right.
But that was a pretty profound moment. As Elise said, sometimes people can look back 20 years or 10 years and say, oh, I know a little bit more about what that probably meant going into it. So,
yeah, there's some subtle red flags, and I know people will probably think against this one, but I've had one or two actually interviews that people have said, how much will it cost to get you here? And that immediately throws a red flag to me to say, you're having trouble filling this spot and you're just paying through the roof, for whatever you need to get a body here. And that, it sounds appealing, like, oh, let me just put my price tag, but you need to take a step back and think outside of that. Am I going to be miserable every day for a certain amount of money? And, if that money is large enough, I'll gladly jump in. But,
good to know your price, Dan.
but it's those subtle things that you don't think about while you're going through it, because you're like, oh, I need a job, I need to move forward. But you need to think through all of the questions and points that you're listening to during those conversations.
Yeah. And even practical things like Glassdoor. It's getting some of that. And I know Glassdoor can be, companies can kind of pay their way out of the negative feedback, but it's just another way to get a sample of what the culture might be like. And I don't know if folks have found any other, like Fishbowl, I think is part of Glassdoor, and there might be other platforms out there to get more of a sense. LinkedIn, I don't know if LinkedIn has resources like
There's
that.
Blind as well.
Oh yeah, Blind. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Blind is an anonymous. It's kind of like an anonymous Facebook for talking about work, right? It doesn't seem to want all of your information like Glassdoor does. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to get into the weeds.
I had a client once who took a job and kind of knew from the interview process that it probably wasn't, I don't know that the word toxic work environment was even like
a thing
in the vernacular at that point. But one of the things that their motto was no excuses. And this wasn't I don't know that I'd want that in any environment, but this wasn't like a big sports team where it was like, oh, this was an organization that honestly, that was how they operated. There was no excuse. You needed to know it. You needed to do it. There was no mentoring. There was no coaching. There was no guiding. And the expectation was, you need to come in, do it. And it was just one of the very many toxic situations that were happening in that workplace, but that also could have been a big red flag that
and
wasn't known.
I think that a lot of it is, Ernie, your definition at the beginning really resonates, right? It's about fit. And so a toxic environment to one person could be a perfect fit for another. And so obviously there's some norms out there about respect and those types of things and how people treat each other. And yet there are plenty of people out there who would love a no excuses environment. We just have to understand ourselves. We have to see the flags. Those mottos are really telling of when they don't resonate with us, when they feel funny. Work hard, play hard is another one. Some people, obviously that was big a long time ago, but it's also, that's a sign that people just work really hard.
Yeah.
And then they play hard together maybe. And it's just not an environment that some of us want, but it is an environment that others.
That's a great point, that the responsibility is on the job applicant and the employee to an extent too, to not put themselves in a situation where they'll be at odds with their values. And while we were talking, I was Googling an old movie from the 90s called Glengarry Glen Ross, which is kind of for older folks among us, a kind of a touchstone for like the epitome of a toxic sales environment where it's sales at all costs. And what was it? I forget what there's a tagline coming out of that I'll have to go look up, but it's like sales eats first or something like that. But closers, something about closers. Now I've got to go back and do research. But if you're a quiet, introverted, don't like the noise, analytical person, you don't put yourself in that situation because you'll be miserable every day, right? So there's absolutely some accountability on the individual to do some research and ensure that what they're getting themselves into isn't going to be at odds. And I think having to, if you're looking at the paycheck or the title and thinking it's worth the sacrifice, it might not be, right? Because that may manifest in your life and your health and just overall well-being, and even the way you work with your team.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and many people know this. Well, and I'm going to do the same because I'm, many people know my bias is about like self-confidence. It's about knowing your own knowing your own strengths, knowing your own capabilities, and really, and leaning into those and trusting them. And so when you're in, I know why this justle came about. It's because it's really hard looking for a job, and it kind of sucks, and it really erodes your self-esteem, and it erodes our confidence. And that's when we're vulnerable to not hearing some of those things, not asking some of the hard questions because we don't want to know the answers. And so that's when we really either have to trust ourselves and be able to be objective about it, or trust others, our friends, our family, professionals, to say like, did you ask a question about whether are there any women in a leadership role, for those of us who are women and wondering, is there any, in any people, in any minority sector, is there someone who looks like me, who is a little bit like me, who has been successful here? Can I talk to them? What's their experience has been like? And so anytime you hear somebody's paving the way, or was a real self-starter, or was a real go-getter, all those types of things, those are kind of euphemisms for like, nobody was helping them. There's no mentor, there's no structure. And we have to have the confidence to hear those things, because in an interview, I think we really selectively listen if we don't have that inner core.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I tend to bounce my feelings off my wife a lot, because I'm one of those like, oh, cool, I got a new job, and I get all excited and I start bouncing. I'm like, yeah, they're going to give me X, Y, Z. And then she'll listen to me. She goes, are you listening to yourself? And kind of point out, you said you didn't like this, before you know it, it's turned completely upside down. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't really like that job at all, but I just got excited because it's something new and something not what I'm doing, and something interesting. Sounds like it's going to be something interesting, but in the end, it doesn't work out. And again, I took a long time between jobs just to really flush out what I was looking for. So there is that opportunity these days that you can do that. I know it's financially difficult, but there's so many opportunities out there, and find something that's a good fit for you is great. But yeah, definitely bounce it off of a partner, a coach, a friend, anything, and just see what their reaction is to yours and take out your personal emotion of it, right? They're going to look at it a little bit more analytical than you would.
Yeah, and I recently had that experience in talking to some folks on this call. I recently started the job a few months ago, and it was great to just have that balanced perspective, knowing that, mirroring some of what Dan just said, there's that initial like, ooh, shiny, but just thinking through, is this the journey I want to be on? Is this what fills my tank? What sparks joy? And I'd say probably the first time in a long time I've been this deliberate and thoughtful and thinking through a longer journey versus just that next step up or that next financial step. So just first, I just have that firsthand experience knowing that there's a positive outcome in calibrating on what's truly going to make you happy. Yeah, Natalie, we haven't heard from you in a while. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, just in line that the new job should align with your own values. It's not only the company who interviews you, you also should interview the company, and you should feel free to ask questions about the culture and what a person who interviews you likes or doesn't like at work. What are the difficult situations that they're dealing with? And that's how you can gather more information and understand if that's a place that you're actually interested to work or not. And sometimes maybe the financial aspect is more important during a certain period of time, rather than maybe, let's say, psychological safety or feeling comfortable at work. Another time for someone, no, they want to feel comfortable at first and then already think about how much money they get. So this is just a self-reflection and understanding, what is important for you right now.
Great. Well, and if you believe it or not, we are coming up on time here. This has been a fantastic conversation. Maybe we can have a toxic workplace part 2 and focus a little more on, I think we spent a lot of time today talking about recognizing that as you're looking for the role. I'd love to have a follow-up on kind of navigating through, and like, what if you're stuck in this job, right? How do you power through that and still maintain, keep your soul and your health and carve out what's important to you? And then if you need to kind of plot an escape, how can people do that? So I'd love to revisit this if you folks are up to it, and we'll regroup on it. But before we go, want to give everybody an opportunity to wind down and offer some closing thoughts here. And I'm going to start with Ali.
So this has been a fantastic conversation, and I think that what is most important, and it's come up a few different times in a few different ways, is being true to yourself.
Yeah.
You're the one that has to show up every day and either feel excited and engaged to be at work, or wanting to be, feeling not wanting to feel nauseous all day long, or, on the drive-in or wherever. So I think being true to what's most important to you at that time in your life, and being able to do the best work that you can do in the environment that you're in.
All right, Natalie, you're up.
I'd say everyone has a power to either change the situation or change how they think about the situation. So if you're uncomfortable with where you are, what you're facing, you can either try to change it or try to change how you think about it.
Yeah, and if I can turn that a bit, we know that there's a victim saboteur that people can get hung up on, right? Where they just don't feel empowered to change their situation, and it's not them, it's everybody else, right? And we've coached clients through getting more control, being in the driver's seat, and that's a fantastic message to leave people with. Great. How's the dog, Elise?
Good, we're good. So yeah, I think what's really, I would just say, is for people to trust their instincts in an interview, in a work environment, and go with your gut on what's feeling weird, what's not feeling comfortable. And if you're having a hard time trusting your instincts, it's a sign that maybe there is a confidence issue. Maybe there is someone, an outsider, who can help you, either just being a mirror or help you grow that confidence so that you can then really trust the voice inside of you, because that will help down the road as well.
Awesome. And Dan?
Yeah, to me, it's communication, and that's really hard for someone who's an introvert, but you need to talk to people. Again, you can't bring it all upon yourself to make all the right decisions for your life. You need an external perspective sometimes to, just view it from a different glass, if you will, and so talk to people, again, friends, colleagues. If you're in what you think is a toxic work environment, talk to a manager's peer, as opposed to just your direct management, and try to understand, what's going on at that level. Again, from an external perspective, not just try to focus on your problems or your issues. Try to correct those, but really just, try to get all the facts straight before you make a step forward.
Yeah. And I'd say, and if you feel safe enough where you have options and a little more security, and you're not concerned about losing your job the next day, in some cases, the leader may not even realize they're showing up that way, right? And saying, hey, do you know that this is how everyone sees you, right? A coaching moment because believe it or not, leaders sometimes need their own coaching from their staff, because they may just be tone deaf or have low emotional intelligence and just aren't understanding. Might be new managers who aren't understanding what they're doing to their team and to the blast radius around them. So I'd say that's a little bit too of around not making assumptions, assuming positive intent. Generally, people are inherently good, and so for me, I try to land on trying to salvage the situation, and I haven't always been successful, but is there a way to drive understanding, to piggyback on what Dan said around communication, to ensure that for despite the best of intentions, people might not be showing up as their best selves. And
I think that's a great point, just to kind of like pull all of that together, what you and Dan just said. It's about one of the hallmarks of a healthy environment, not a toxic one, is the ability to have courageous conversations across the organization.
Yeah. Great. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate everyone's time for coming together this morning and this afternoon for Natalie. So we'll post everyone's websites here. I'm going to say right now, everyone here in this conversation, they're all excellent coaches. Seek them out, go to their websites, get some time with them. Ali Glaser, Natalie Skvortsova, Ilyse Greenberg, and of course, Dan Diomeda. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.